Shabbat Shalom, my friends. It was never my intention to connect these weekly conversations with current events. Torah study deserves to take place in a safe, secure setting so that we can sense the flow of 3,000 years of dialogue with our sacred texts, and so that we might actually enter into that flow as well. Of course, we want our behavior to reflect what it is that we learn. Of course, we would hope that what we learn would help us to live more purposefully, more ethically, in a more centered fashion in our own times. But that private space is integral to Torah study. We need that private space. We really do. And yet we find ourselves forced by external events to pause once again this week to reflect on that outer world, this time on the terrorist attack on the west side of New York City. We mourn the murdered. We weep for those who have been permanently disabled or who bear deep, long-lasting psychological scars. And even as we are told, as we once were told after 9/11, to go back to living our normal lives, we know deep down that we are now moving into a new normal out there. More screening, more police, more invasions of privacy in the name of uncovering new terrorist threats. May the memory of the righteous be for a blessing. May our leaders be blessed with wisdom and understanding, and may evil vanish soon from off the face of the earth. Okay, moving on. A shout out to Leslie Sachs in Jerusalem. Leslie, who was the indefatigable executive director of Women of the Wall, WOW, wrote this week to tell me that she's a regular participant in our study. Hi, Leslie. You are the best. Our Sedra is VaYera, Genesis 18:1 to 22:24. And continuing in Genesis' wonderful tradition, this Sedra is filled from end to end with memorable events, with stories of encounters and spiritual discoveries that continue to shape literally all of Western civilization. Abraham hosts 3 visitors. Were they angels? Sodom and Gomorrah are going to be destroyed by God, who has lost patience with the sinfulness of their inhabitants. Abraham argues with God. But these 2 cities that will be forever synonymous with gross sinfulness will nevertheless be reduced to ashes after a heavenly assault with the standard fire and brimstone. Meanwhile, Sarah, poor old Sarah, hears that she will give birth to a son in her old age, and she laughs bitterly at such perceived nonsense. But Sarah does give birth. Behold, Isaac. And then several decades after Isaac's birth, Abraham hears a divine call to sacrifice his beloved son on an altar to God. And Abraham, our loving first patriarch, without a word of protest, rushes knife in hand to complete the task. Now there are no arguments from Abraham, just a willingness to comply. Poor old Sarah. Poor clueless Isaac. We can even feel sorry for that ram that gave its all to die in place of Isaac. But finding sympathy for Abraham is more than a little challenging right here. This past summer, I had the unique pleasure of studying in a Beit Midrash hosted by the Hebrew Union College for a small group of truly outstanding students, and it was open as well to superannuated Read Dinosaur members of the Hebrew Union College community. Our theme was the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. We were granted magnificent access by outstanding professors to references to the Akedah in modern Israeli poetry, in the Talmud, in the Midrash, in medieval Jewish philosophy, and in Kierkegaard's Fear and Trembling. What does faith demand of us? Does the suspension of the ethical necessarily precede our willingness to bow low before the inexorable will of God? Abraham fought to save Sodom and Gomorrah, but later he acquiesced eagerly before what he felt was a divine imperative to kill his own son. Is the text indicating that God wants our absolute surrender before we can be braced by some divine favor? Is the best use of our free will to be the shutting down of our capacity to make ethical decisions so that we can serve some better good? What a frightening and deeply trembling thought. And yet Kierkegaard insists that only when shutting down one's personal ethical system, by taking that ultimate leap of faith, can we truly be obedient to the will of God. Has anyone ever said to you, trust me on this? It's really an appealing offer, isn't it? I don't have to do any I'm getting rid of the cat. I don't have to do any financial analysis. I don't have to think through complex moral or ethical implications. I don't even have to take the lead. Trust me on this. Follow me. And yet, more often than not, that appealing effort to calm our tormented uncertainty can lead us to some very unpleasant outcomes. Trust me on this. They'll never find out who did it. Trust me on this. We'll only do this deal once. Promise, never again. Trust me on this. Come on. Everyone cheats, and after all, the government doesn't really care about us small guys. Trust me on this. You'll replace those funds in your kids' trust fund within 6 months. Guaranteed. Trust me on this. If she would have the chance to do this to you, she'd do it in a heartbeat. Don't hesitate. Trust me on this. The internet exists just so that we can share information. That's not plagiarism. It's the way things are done today. Why should you be the only one to break your back on this particular assignment? Abraham believes that God was telling him, trust me on this. It seemed like the righteous thing to do after all. It seemed like the expedient thing to do. It seemed like the fair thing to do. So Abraham felt himself amply blessed by God. Sometimes you have to show gratitude. My friends, I can't imagine when it would ever be appropriate for me to stop taking responsibility for the decisions that I make. The crowd is calling for a certain action. That doesn't mean that I should comply. My best friend is whispering into my ear about some great opportunities that lie ahead. That doesn't mean that I must pay serious attention. A so-called expert says that climate change is real or unreal, that evolution is real or unreal, that God is real or unreal. Nothing compels me to go with the flow. My very humanity is intimately connected with my capacity to make independent decisions, to analyze, to think through, to weigh the consequences, to know what truly serves my perceived best interests. So long as my mind and my soul are reasonably intact, I worry about the mind. The soul is okay. I won't be following the crowd. I won't depend upon whispered assurances from somebody on high. I won't take paths that require me to be morally blind or obtuse. I will think, and then I will act, and then I will absorb the consequences. Well, that's it for this Shabbat. Have a wonderful weekend, so long as you decide that having a wonderful weekend is in your best interest. And please, if you'd like, hit share so that we can expand our circle of friends who share in our conversations. Shabbat Shalom.